It looked like a shotgun that had been cut in half and left too close to a fire. 31 inches long, 6 pounds empty, a single break-action barrel wide enough to put your thumb into. When a soldier fired it, it did not bang. It made a hollow, wet sound, somewhere between a cough and a bubble surfacing. That is what the men in Vietnam named it, the Blooper. Some called it the Thumper. Some called it the Bloop Tube. The name was not affectionate at first. A rifle sounds like a weapon. This sounded like a toy being dropped into a bathtub. And the man who carried it was not issued a rifle at all. He was handed the launcher and a pistol and told to stand in a firefight with both. They were wrong about it. Inside its working range, a trained grenadier could put an explosive charge through a bunker slit at 150 meters. Not near it, through it. And it closed a gap in the battlefield that had been killing infantry since 1918. This is the story of the M79, a 6-pound tube that sounded like a joke, and became the first thing an American squad reached for when a tree line opened up on them. But to understand why it mattered, you have to understand the gap. For most of the 20th century, an infantry squad had exactly 2 ways to throw an explosive at someone. The first was a hand grenade. A fit soldier could throw one about 35 meters. On a good day, 40. Beyond that, he was dropping it into open ground in front of his own position, which was worse than doing nothing. The second was a mortar. A mortar could reach 2,000 meters and further, but it also had a minimum range. Below roughly 300 meters, the tube could not be elevated steeply enough, and the crew risked putting the round on top of themselves. So there was a band between the two, everything from about 40 meters out to about 300. The army had a name for it: dead space. In open country, dead space was an inconvenience. In Vietnam, dead space was where the war happened. Contacts in jungle and paddy opened at 50 to 200 meters, and very often closer than that. A machine gun dug in at the edge of a tree line at 120 meters was too far away to throw at and too close to call a mortar on. The only option was to pin it with rifle fire and wait for something heavier to arrive. Waiting cost people, every time. The army had been trying to close that gap since the First World War. Rifle grenades came first. A cup fitted over the muzzle of a rifle, a blank cartridge in the chamber, and a grenade sitting on top of it. They worked. Almost everyone who used them hated them. The recoil was punishing. Accuracy was poor. And to fire one, a man had to stop being a rifleman. He had to fit the launcher, chamber the blank, and point his rifle at the sky. In a firefight, that was time he did not have. By 1952, the Army had opened a formal research program to find something better. It was called Project Niblick. The requirement was easy to write down and almost impossible to build. They wanted a shoulder-fired weapon that could throw a fragmentation grenade 350 meters, landed accurately, weigh little enough for one man to carry all day, and recoil so little that he could still see the target after firing. The physics were against them from the start. To throw a projectile that far, you need pressure. To survive that pressure in a weapon light enough to carry, you need to not have it. The two requirements cancel each other out. For 9 years, nothing worked. The answer had already been written down. It simply happened to be written in German. During the Second World War, German ordnance engineers developed something they called the high-low pressure system. It was used in a light anti-tank gun, and after the war, the design work passed into Allied hands along with everything else. The idea is easier to see than to explain. A normal cartridge is one chamber. The propellant burns, pressure spikes, the projectile leaves, and all of that pressure travels back into the weapon and into the man holding it. A high-low cartridge is 2 chambers. The propellant sits inside a small, thick steel cup buried in the base of the round. When it burns, the pressure inside that cup climbs to somewhere in the region of 35,000 pounds per square inch. That pressure never touches the weapon. It is sealed inside the cartridge. The cup has vent holes drilled through it. The gas bleeds out through those holes into the much larger empty space behind the grenade, and by the time it arrives, the pressure has collapsed to roughly 3,000. The grenade leaves the barrel at about 76 meters per second, slow enough to follow with your eyes. That is the entire trick. The violence happens inside a steel cup the size of a thimble, and the weapon only ever feels what is left over. It is also the reason the M79 sounded the way it did. There was no sharp crack because there was no high-pressure gas leaving the muzzle. There was no flash worth the name. There was only a low, hollow thump as the grenade left the barrel. The men named the weapon after the sound of its own restraint. Springfield Armory finished the design in 1960. The weapon was adopted in 1961. And then, the Army did something that very nearly killed it. The M79 was single shot. Fire, break it open, extract the case, reload, close. A practiced grenadier could manage 5 to 7 rounds a minute. Between those rounds, he had nothing. The official answer to that problem was a pistol. The grenadier was issued a .45 and told it was his personal defense. In practice, this meant that in every squad in Vietnam, 1 or 2 of the most valuable men in the formation were standing in a firefight holding a handgun. Units solved it themselves, the way units always do. Grenadiers carried a rifle anyway, slung across the back, or borrowed one, or stayed within arm's reach of a man who had one. Some carried a shotgun instead. Officially, none of this was sanctioned. It took the Army until the early 1970s to fix it properly. And the fix was to mount the whole system underneath an M16 and call it the M203. But long before that happened, the 6-pound tube with the toy noise had already changed how an American squad fought. Start with the round. The standard high-explosive grenade was the M406, a little under 40 millimeters across, around 230 grams. Inside it, a small charge of Composition B wrapped in a wound steel liner. When it detonated, that liner broke apart into roughly 300 fragments, thrown outward at well over 1,000 meters per second, with a lethal radius of about 5 meters and a casualty radius considerably wider than that. The round was also spin-armed. Rifling in the barrel set it turning, and it would not arm until it had rotated enough times to have traveled somewhere between 14 and 28 meters. Fired at anything closer, it would strike and simply not go off. That was deliberate. It meant a grenadier could fire past his own people. Now put those two facts together. A man carrying 6 pounds of steel could place a charge with a 5-meter kill radius through a specific opening in a specific bunker at 150 meters. He could do it in about 4 seconds, and the people on the receiving end would hear almost nothing until it landed. That last part is the part the enemy noticed. A mortar announces itself. The round climbs high, travels slowly, and comes down with an audible descent. Soldiers under mortar fire can hear it coming and get flat. An M79 round arrives on a far shallower arc, from far closer, with almost no signature at the firing end and none at all in flight. The first indication of an M79 attack was usually the detonation. For a machine gun team dug in along a tree line, this rewrote the arithmetic entirely. Before, they could open fire at 100 meters, inflict casualties, and pull out before anything heavy could be brought down on them. The gap protected them. Dead space was their cover. Now a single man 200 meters away could put a grenade into their position within seconds of them revealing it, and then put another one in 10 seconds later, and keep doing it until they stopped. There is a second round worth mentioning. Because the barrel was 40 millimeters wide, it could be loaded with things other than grenades. One of them was a buckshot cartridge, packed with around 20 hardened pellets. At close range in heavy vegetation, that turned the M79 into a very large shotgun. A grenadier ambushed at 10 meters was not helpless after all. The clearest measure of what the weapon was worth is what happened when the Army tried to take it away. roughly 350,000 M79s were built. By the late 1960s, 2 of them were standard in most infantry squads. When the M203 arrived, it should have replaced them completely. It mounted the same 40mm system under a rifle and solved the pistol problem in a single move. On paper, there was no argument left. The replacement was not complete. It was not even close. Grenadiers kept the M79. They kept it because the standalone weapon was more accurate than the underbarrel version, because it had proper sights instead of a compromise, because it came up into the shoulder and balanced like a shotgun, and because a man who has learned to drop a grenade through a window at 150 meters does not want to be handed a different weapon and told to learn again. The M79 stayed in American service, in specialist hands, into the 21st century. It is still carried by other armies today, more than 60 years after Springfield finished the drawings. And the reason goes all the way back to the noise. The soldiers who first received it judged it by how it sounded, and it sounded ridiculous. It went bloop, no crack, no real muzzle flash, no recoil that shoved a man backwards. Everything a weapon was supposed to feel like, it did not feel like. But every one of those absences was the design working. No crack, because the high pressure never left the cartridge. No recoil, because the gas behind the grenade was at 3,000 pounds instead of 35,000. And because there was no recoil, one man could carry it all day, aim it deliberately, and fire again 10 seconds later, without his shoulder or his eyes needing to recover first. The thing that made it sound like a toy was the exact thing that made it precise. And precision at ranges between 40 and 300 meters was the one thing nobody had been able to deliver since 1918. There is one more detail worth knowing. The high-low pressure system that made the M79 possible was not designed for a grenade launcher, and it was not designed by anyone in America. It was developed in Germany during the Second World War for a light anti-tank gun meant to give paratroopers something they could actually carry into a drop zone. That gun was built in small numbers, saw limited service, and is remembered today, when it is remembered at all, as a footnote. The principle behind it outlived the weapon it was built for by more than half a century. An idea Germany used briefly and set aside became, 20 years later, the thing an American rifle squad reached for first when a tree line lit up. That happens more often in weapons history than people expect. The design is rarely what decides. What decides is whether the men holding it understand what they have been given. For a while, with the Blooper, they did not. They heard a soft, silly noise and assumed nothing was happening. It took them about one firefight to learn otherwise. If you found this one interesting, subscribe for more stories about the weapons everybody underestimated.